Hello there, everyone. Welcome to God TV Radio, and welcome to this very special live stream where you see that me and Jackson Wheat, who actually showed up, which is fantastic. I know that Brett and I have had experiences the last couple of years with non-believers as far as Christianity goes that say they'll come and debate us and they'll take us on, but then when we actually give them an invite to come onto a live show and talk with us, they usually don't. So Jackson Wheat is already getting brownie points and making a good impression on us for just simply being here. So thank you for coming, Jackson. There, you can unmute yourself if you want. You're allowed to talk.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Sorry.
You are welcome. And
Jackson is a professional.
Yes. And I have Brett Keene here to basically be referee. I think Jackson and I can have a interesting discussion without Brett having to do much, but just in case things get a little off track or too off track or a little weird, that's what Brett's here for, is to keep us in line.
Yeah, I think everything's going to be fine. It's been a good week, TTOR. Got to see Deadpool and Wolverine recently with my son.
Nice.
Yeah, I've been hearing about that movie. And for the first time in I don't even know how long anymore, we are live on Quarter as well as live on Rumble. So yay for more channels that honor freedom of speech. And we'll be able to say what we want and not have to worry about being cut off. So with that being said, since Jackson's here and since I think we're all ready, what we're going to do in tonight's live stream is that I am going to talk with Jackson about some of the things he said in his live stream response to one of my recent videos. And I'll actually pull that up on screen here in a minute so that people can know I'm not talking about something that doesn't exist. And we're going to talk about some of those things. And then we're going to talk about one of the other videos of mine he talked about in that. And we're also going to talk about the tweet of his I made a response to that was part of my original video that started this whole thing. So let me pull up Jackson Wheat's YouTube channel first because context is key. We talk about real things here, and we got to have the reference for you guys. Okay. All right, so there we go. Let me just screen share that so they know what we're talking about. So it is this live stream in particular called Responding to Truth, the Objective Reality. And that's the one where some of these things we're going to talk about come from, just so you guys have a reference for that. And with that being said, the first thing I would actually like to ask you about, Jackson, is one of the very first things you said in that live stream. You and your friend, I don't remember what his name is, I want to say Peter, talked about how I make videos about people like Apologia and Kent Hovind because I'm chasing clout, views, and subs. Now, I find that kind of a weird accusation because when you look at the substance of those videos, as far as the Kent Hovind thing goes, it's mostly the fact that he's a pedo enabler who literally was running interference for one of his pedo friends and a boy that went missing. And of course, if anyone followed that in the aftermath of those exposés I did, the friend of his he was running interference for got arrested again for more of the same things. So that's what I was mainly talking about with Kent Hovind. And as far as other people like Apologia, Professor Stick, or Genetically Modified Skeptic, or even just random atheist evolutionist users on the internet that make points that I feel need to be responded to, just as a general response, not necessarily towards them. I feel like all my videos have a point and they're not just chasing views and clout. And I see this especially when I compare how my videos do on YouTube with how they do on my alt tech channels like Rumble, BitChute, etc. And those same videos don't exactly bring me views on other places. So it seems like if I was chasing views and clout, I would want to do something that was more guaranteed to do that across the board. Wouldn't you say?
So that was a comment made by Peter, not myself. And if I remember correctly, which I do because I just listened to the video, I said, well, I've been around for a long time too. And I don't really have a lot of subscribers either.
Yeah, you are approaching 10,000 though, so you're way ahead
I mean,
of me.
yeah, but I mean, I've been at this for what 8 years now, and I'm satisfied with the crowd that I have, and I mean, I don't really consider that in general. I mean, in some sense, we all do this for clout, don't we? We're all on YouTube because we want our voices heard. So,
Well, there's a difference between just wanting your voice to be heard. Hi, Andreas Segova. Good to see you on Rumble. There's a difference between wanting to have your voice be heard versus doing something literally just to get clout, which I know people that
sure.
do that on the internet. Mario the Vigilant Christian, I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but he was someone who
No.
literally did that. And I had quite a bit to say about him back in the day.
I mean,
that was like a few years ago.
And again, this wasn't a comment that I made.
Right.
And
So
I did say I've been around for a while too, and
So since that wasn't a comment you made, and that was a comment that your other guy made, maybe you can speak to this generally. Don't you think it's a little bit dismissive of someone to say that they're simply making videos about someone for clout and views, when in reality they could be having a legitimate concern that they're making about those people?
Sure, could be, which is why I said, well, I've been around for a while too. And, I didn't just dismiss your video. We spent an entire, 2 hours looking at it. So,
yep. Well, you looked at multiple videos because one of them wasn't even related. But yeah,
sure. It was just something I saw as I was, because I hadn't looked at your channel before. And so I was looking just to see what kind of stuff you typically do. And so I came across that. Yeah. But you're right. It wasn't really relevant to the tweet that spurred this whole thing. So.
Okay. Well, I feel like that's cleared up. So let's move on to something you actually did say.
All right.
You took offense, or maybe not offense, maybe you took issue with me retweeting a Stone Toss comic, basically insinuating that I'm Nazi adjacent and that you insinuate I'm a Holocaust denier because of this, because of the simple fact that I retweeted a guy who you alleged was those things. And so I'm just curious to know where you feel like it's justified to insinuate that about me simply because I retweeted a guy's comic that I may have found amusing or felt like made a good point.
Well, first, you can retweet any comic anytime you want. I mean, it is Twitter after all. Second, again, my comment. Well, in this case, my comment was that's a red flag, which I agree it is. Stone Toss, someone who has, at the very best, downplayed the Holocaust and has made very hateful comments and comics against gays, trans people. I think it is a red flag in general because I've seen his comics on Twitter, and but again, you're free to retweet whoever you want.
So I'm confused because when I look at Stone Toss's comic history, much like South Park, he seems to bag on just about everybody. So I would say he's probably an equal opportunist in that regard. Therefore, if I retweet him, it doesn't mean that I agree with his troublesome views that you have a problem with. Don't you think?
Not necessarily. I'd have to look at, for instance, if he's bagging on conservative, for instance, is he bagging on a conservative because they're conservative or because they're not conservative in the same way that he is? Or liberal, if it's a liberal, is he bagging on liberals because they're not quite as liberal as he is? I mean, we see this on both sides of the aisle, don't we? If someone's a ultra leftist, right, and we see they're attacking Joe Biden, are we assuming that they're a centrist all of a sudden? No, the substance of their critique probably has something to do with their political position. But again, we'd have to take this on a case-by-case basis, wouldn't we? If we looked at a series of Stone Toss comics, would we be able to divine whether he is a leftist or a centrist or on the right? I'd be very curious to go through a bunch and see that. So,
well, if I had to make a guess right now, based off what I've seen, he's probably center right. It's my guess. But needless to say, the reason I share his comics sometimes is they're the ones that I actually find amusing or interesting in some way. It's not because I am behind any of those views. Actually hold.
I'm glad to hear it.
Yep. Just wanted to clear that up.
Okay. Glad to hear
it. And then my notes disappeared. Now, There was not the video that had your tweet in it that you talked about next, but there
Mhm.
was the one I did about
the bill. Yeah.
Congress passing the bill.
Mhm.
And
Which
in it,
have they passed it yet, or is it still in deliberation?
I'm not sure if it's passed the Senate yet. I just know it passed.
Here, what's the name of the bill? It's HR.
I
it's
actually have
6090.
it right here.
Here it is. Let's see, 6090. It is in. It has passed the House. It has not passed the Senate yet.
Yep, and I'm showing it on screen too, so that everyone knows what we're talking about.
Okay.
Now, in your live stream, what you said in response to, well, not in response to it per se, but like your overall assessment of my video was that you said that I believed it was okay to hate the Jews as a collective due to the historical fact that the Jews killed Jesus. You insinuated that because I pointed out in my video that when you look at the bill, which we can see here on screen, the bill basically just copies and pastes the definition of anti-Semitism that comes from IRA. And when you go to the actual IRA,
and they give you a list of
page,
examples of anti-Semitism, right?
Exactly. And
one
of
which
those
is
examples is the claim that the Jews killed Jesus. Now, the
it's
problem
not actually, that's not what it is. The example is discriminating against Israelis or the country of Israel based on, yep, there it is, using the symbols and images associated with classic anti-Semitism, e.g. the claims of Jews killing Jesus or blood libel, to characterize Israel or Israelis. Now, the issue, of course, is characterizing Israelis.
Now,
that's
the problem I have with what you said is that it says right here, claims of Jews killing Jesus is listed as an example of classic anti-Semitism.
To characterize Israel and Israelis. It's not just, we're just thinking out, historically, okay, the Pharisees got Jesus killed. They're not saying you're not allowed to do that. They're saying to characterize Israel or Israelis.
Can you both do me a favor? The text is hard to see. Would you be able to summarize what the bill is about for the audience and myself, please?
Well, the bill just adopts the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, which is the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. And so the definition that is adopted is the one that's right here, as far as I understand, which says anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed toward Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, toward Jewish community, institutions, and religious facilities. And then the document on the IRA website then gives a whole bunch of contemporary examples of anti-Semitism in public life, one of which you stated in your live stream is it's actually an anti-Semitic claim, was the idea that the Jews killed Jesus. The problem I have with that and why I see it as a way to, in the future, get Bibles banned is because when you look throughout the New Testament, it's not just that the Bible says that the Jews brought Jesus to Pontius Pilate and got Pilate to put Jesus to death by essentially forming an angry mob and forcing him to do it. There's other parts in the Bible where people like Peter and Paul and the other apostles flat out say to their Jewish listeners that they were talking to, you guys killed Jesus. The Jews killed Jesus. So that claim does not come from the early church fathers or anything after that you mentioned in your live stream. It literally goes back to the Bible documents that predate all that.
And I'm not
just to the Bible itself.
You keep kind of doing this bait and switch here. You're trying to make the issue about the claim of Jews killing Jesus, which we all accept here. That's fine. That's not the issue. The issue is using that claim to characterize Israel and Israelis. So using this against them in a discriminatory manner. That's the issue here. We're not talking about, I have no problem with the claim of the Bible that the Pharisees got Jesus killed and that Peter told them that. Fine by me. But we're not just talking about that. We're talking about using this to characterize current people. That's the issue. Okay.
And,
all right.
And then part of the problem, too, I have is that by going down the road you did in your live stream, you basically paint me up as on the anti-Semitic side of things. And anyone who's followed me on my alt tech presences for years knows that I'm not that guy. As a
Well,
matter of
good.
fact, I'm the person who's been roasted on Gab several times for saying simple things like bigotry against Jews is wrong, just as all bigotry is. And I've had people on Gab try to get me kicked off the platform under the guise of being a Fed poster because I say stuff like that.
Okay.
So I
Well, glad
am
to
one
hear
of
it.
those people. I am one of those people who does not endorse any kind of bigotry against Jews, bigotry against whites, Mexicans, blacks,
Great.
whatever you want to
Perfect.
insert for skin colors.
Mhm.
I'm
Right.
against all that bigotry because it's just stupid.
Well,
When you
good.
get beyond the skin, we all have the same parts essentially. We have
Mhm.
the same functions, we have the same brains, we have the same blood,
Mhm.
believe it or not. For some people, believe it or not. Yeah.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
their bigotry it's just really stupid, especially when it's based on something like skin color, which you can't control. It's literally what you're born with.
Mhm. So to bring it back around to what the title of the video was there is no wedge being driven here to divorce Bibles from daily life. That's just not a thing that's happening.
And
And you
if
can
you
very clearly see that in the language of the text there. Literally, to characterize Israel and Israelis.
Yes, but part of that text says that the claim of Jews killing Jesus is an anti-Semitic claim. And my concern is that since the
To
Bible does teach it, at some
characterize.
point in the future, they can use that against
To
us
characterize.
Christians to get the Bible banned because it contains anti-Semitic claims.
I mean, invoking history is not being anti-Semitic. Using history to discriminate a group of people, in that case Jews, would be anti-Semitic. Though there's a difference there. If I say, like, here's some event in history where, I don't know, leftists did something evil, right? And then say, I'm going to discriminate against you if you are a leftist because someone back then did something evil. Well, that would be discrimination. Now, just saying, hey, a leftist did something evil, that's not discrimination. That's just invoking history. There's the difference there, right?
And I would agree with that assessment. But the point of my
Okay.
video wasn't that. It was the fact that people in the future who are very malicious towards Christians can twist it to do that. Because the Bible does say in multiple places that the Jews killed Jesus. And if you get everyone to accept the idea that the Jews killing Jesus is an anti Semitic claim, which is the way the document is worded, the IRA one that they just copied and pasted part of, if they continue to go with IRA on this stuff in the future, malicious actors who get into power could use that very law and that very document to get the Bible ultimately banned on the grounds of anti-Semitic speech. It's something that can happen, and that's my concern. Not that it's going to happen next year or 5 years from now, 10 years from now, or heck, even if my rest of my life. It's something that could happen because the groundwork has been laid for it. And that was the point of my video. And I don't think you got that.
So I still don't see any groundwork at all. And this is, well, in the future, someone could potentially use this in a particular way to do something I disagree with, based on no evidence. Like, there just isn't any. You're just presenting this statement, which is about discriminating against a group of people. It's about using let's say, a fact of history to discriminate against a group of people. And you're saying, well, someone could just take the fact of history and say, well, we have to eliminate documents that describe said fact of history? Like, that's absurd. Like, that just is absurd. There's no evidence that's going to happen. As you said, like, I don't see any reason to think that we're ever going to see that. Maybe, I don't know, some evil atheist takes over in the future and, bans all the Bibles. Okay, maybe, but, like, otherwise, I don't see any reason to think that this would ever be a thing that would happen. So I like, you just didn't provide any evidence for this. So I don't know what to say.
To give you some more context, since you're not familiar with most of my history on the internet and you've just seen a few videos.
Okay.
When I've looked at the Christians that have gone onto this anti-Semitic movement, where basically it's, the Jews in Israel are behind all the evils in the world, and therefore it's okay to be incredibly discriminatory towards them in a variety of ways, I find that very disturbing when I see Christians doing it, because that same Bible
Sure.
that teaches that the Jews killed Jesus also teaches that when Peter spoke to them on the day of Pentecost, that 3,000 of them repented of what they did and got right with God and entered into that personal relationship with Jesus. And then you have Paul in Romans 11, where he talks about how, the Jews did all these bad things, but they're still God's chosen people. And even though they're the enemies of the gospel now, they are the elect, going to be in the future kingdom on account of the promises they made toward their forefathers. So when you're a Bible believing Christian, and that's what your Bible says, in addition to, the Jews killed Jesus, it doesn't make any sense to embrace the latter so hard that you think that all the Jews are evil and that Israel's behind everything bad in the world, and ignore all the parts of your Bible that provide the other half of that story.
Sure.
So
I agree with
when
that.
I look at stuff like that coming from Christians, it's like, geez, guys, you have a book that gives you a lot more detail about how you should think about that issue.
Sure.
And a lot of Christians are falling into this, I would say, trap of anti-Semitism via Christian nationalism.
Oh, sure. I mean, anybody can be anti-Semitic,
Right.
Yeah, anybody can be discriminatory. So.
Okay. Glad to get that out of the way. I don't remember if your guest said this or if you said this, but along that same vein, someone said I was carrying water for the Nazis. Was that you or the other guy?
I don't remember. I didn't get that far. I didn't get that far and watch my own video, but
yeah.
But I think it's safe to say at this point, probably not.
Yeah, I definitely would not have stood with the Nazis at all, especially when they used religion for their own gains, just like a lot of people do.
Sure.
Matter of fact, that's one of the things I hate about Christian nationalism, is that basically there's an ambition there to do a lot of the same things that the globalists they claim to be fighting against are wanting, which is basically a one world system of government where those in power control and regulate all activity and life under the sun on this planet. It's very much a prison planet type system. The difference is that in their little utopia, it's Christians are the ones ruling over every part of the planet. And basically, we have 1,000 years of peace before Jesus comes back because we're the ones in control of it for 1,000 years. And I find that so disturbing, too, because it's another one of those topics that goes right against what the Bible teaches about end times, which teaches that the Christians are not going to get in power and take control of the world. As a matter of fact, they're going to be persecuted and hunted down so badly that they're going to be on the verge of extinction when Jesus comes back. And it's when he comes back that he basically rescues the remainder of his followers on earth at that time. And then he overthrows the beast system. And then 1,000 years of peace ensues. And then the kingdom is established after the final judgment. So when you look at that part of the Bible too, you see that Christian nationalists, at least, Christians who claim to be part of that movement, they are so off on just what their own book says. And what makes it weirder is that they like to talk about how much respect they have for the Bible, how much they read it, how much they study it, and yet they're missing such basic elementary things that have been in the Bible ever since it was written and put together, and they just can't see it.
Okay.
Now, since I only got 15 minutes into your live stream, because I have a pretty busy life as a full-time TV producer.
That's totally fair.
Was there anything in particular regarding my video about atheists that I had the collection of guys I was responding to, including you? Is there anything in particular other than your tweet that you mentioned that you think the audience watching this should hear?
I don't even remember the other tweets.
Okay. Well, in that case, I'll just go ahead and...
When you said the first 15 minutes while we were doing the intro, I went back and I listened to the first 15 minutes of my video.
Okay, so
I don't remember what the other ones were.
So then we'll talk about this then, because the whole thing that even started this was your original tweet from July 7th, which was a month ago, where you said trust the science is shorthand for provisionally accept the, I think you meant accepting the consensus of experts. You're not doing experiments because you're just a hack on Twitter. And you were saying this in response to
Wall Street Silver.
Yeah. Who primarily does a lot of commentary on current events, especially related to a lot of the coronavirus stuff that happened the last 4 years.
Every so often, I'll just see like a random tweet from someone, which is probably like I don't know, like rage bait or whatever, and so I'll respond to it. And I know I shouldn't. That's why I blocked Wendell for several months on Twitter, and then I was weak and I unblocked him, and here I go again.
Right. So
before you guys continue on to the next topic, TTOR, can you look at that verse in private chat? And I'd like to know what you, as well as Mr. Jackson's view on that is.
Okay, so that's John 10:18, King James Version. No man taketh it from me, but I lay it down of myself. I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it again. This commandment have I received of my Father. This is Jesus talking in John chapter 10, talking about how he has the authority to lay down his own life and the power to take it back up again after he's laid down his own life, which was obviously a foreshadowing of his death and resurrection. So I'd say that Jesus, even though he was ultimately killed by the Jews, it wasn't exactly something he didn't see coming or was surprised by. He knew it was coming. That's why he prayed to God the Father in the Garden of Gethsemane, Father, if it be your will, take this from my cup, but your will be done. So Jesus was not looking forward to that part, but he knew it was coming, and he willingly allowed himself to be killed by the Jews in the way that they got him put to death, because his mission was our salvation. He was basically presenting himself as the perfect sinless lamb for all sins, past, present, and future, that we can all have the opportunity to get redeemed, to get into a saving personal relationship with God through him. And so that's what Jesus is foreshadowing here in this verse.
Do you have a position on that, Jackson, or a perception?
No. Oh, my screen just froze. Oh, wait. Whoops. Hold on 1 second. Let me refresh. No, I don't think so. That sounds fine to me. Give me 1 second.
You can just click the camera thing down below and then reset it. Okay, he's going to try to refresh it. It was the first line of the passage that I thought might stir some something for you guys.
Sorry, my camera just freezes sometimes. I don't know why. I apologize for that. It may
have. All right.
You might want to set your camera to 720 or 480 whenever in here, because it limits it. If you try playing your camera at 1080, you're going to have those moments and stuttering.
Okay, wait. It says it's on high def 720, right? You said turn it down to 480 from 720?
If you feel you're having issues, then it won't be so much processor power.
It's like, for some weird reason, like it randomly, like it'll be like maybe like in the middle of a stream, it'll just do that like once and then won't do it again. Like sometimes it does it more than once. I have no idea. Like when my computer just decides, you know what? No more screen, actually. I don't know.
That's usually an internet connection thing.
That's weird.
Well, the good news is you've been coming through great the whole time. So
okay,
that was just a one-time deal, I think. Hopefully.
Here's hoping. Yeah. Okay.
So let me get back to what we were talking about, because it's important.
Wall Street Silver.
Yes, we were talking about that. Now, I didn't get far enough into your live stream to see what your response was to what I said, but
I just reiterated my tweet, basically. I still stand behind it.
So, do you even know where I got that line I said from?
The one that's right here on screen?
The idea that the majority opinion of the scientific and academic community should just be believed because we're too stupid to do our own research or think for ourselves. Do you know where I got that from?
So you see how I said provisionally accept?
Mm-hmm. But do you know where I'm getting what I said from?
Do I know where your quote came from? No, I don't.
Okay, good. So we can actually go ahead and do something educational that I think you'll find interesting because I'm definitely not making that lineup from the clear blue sky. I just got to make this application window. So, about 4 years ago, Forbes put out an article titled, "You Must Not Do Your Own Research When It Comes to Science." Now, I'm going to read the
Okay.
first two paragraphs and the last two paragraphs so you
Okay.
can see
You
where
must not
that
do
part of my tweet comes from.
Not do your own research, Forbes. It's hard. It's kind of hard for me to see.
Right.
So I'm just,
I get it.
okay. All right. Go ahead.
So research both sides and make up your own mind. It's simple, straightforward, common sense advice. And when it comes to issues like vaccinations and climate change and the novel coronavirus SARS-CoV-2, it can be dangerous, destructive, and even deadly. The techniques that most of us use to navigate most of our decisions in life, gathering information, evaluating it based on what we know, and choosing a course of action, can lead to spectacular failures when it comes to a scientific matter. The reason is simple. Most of us, even those of us who are scientists ourselves, lack the relevant scientific expertise needed to adequately evaluate that research on our own. In our own fields, we are aware of the full suite of data of how those puzzle pieces fit together and what the frontiers of our knowledge is. When laypersons espouse opinions on those matters, it's immediately clear to us where the gaps in their understandings are and where they've misled themselves in their reasoning. When they take up the arguments of a contrarian scientist, we recognize what they're overlooking, misinterpreting, or omitting, unless we start valuing the actual expertise that legitimate experts have spent lifetimes developing. Doing our own research could lead to immeasurable, unnecessary suffering. And then the last two paragraphs are a much better just as good of an articulation of the issue.
Okay.
There is no excuse with all the wonderful scientists and science communicators telling the truth about a whole slew of issues in our world for people to seek out only the opinions that confirm their own biases. The best scientists in the world, even the ones who hold contrarian beliefs of their own, all agree that we should base our policies on the scientific consensus that we've achieved. When that consensus changes, evolves, or moves forward because we've learned more than we previously knew, we should correct course to follow that novel path. But that requires a kind of transformation within yourself. It means that you need to be humble and admit that you yourself lack the necessary expertise to evaluate the science before you. It means that you need to be brave enough to turn to the consensus of scientific experts and ask legitimately what we know at the present stage. And it means you need to be open-minded enough to understand that your preconceptions are quite likely to be wrong in some, many, or possibly even all ways. If we listen to the science, we can attempt to change the best path possible forward through the greatest challenges facing modern society. We can choose to ignore it, but if we do, the consequences will only increase in severity. Now, those first two paragraphs and those last two paragraphs of the article, basically the way to sum it up and the way I've summed it up ever since I've read it, is that basically people like me, people like Brett Keane, we're apparently we're so dumb. We're so lacking in the necessary expertise to evaluate anything that we're looking at that we need to trust what experts say on those topics because doing our own research just won't work because you see, we're lacking the necessary expertise to evaluate what we're looking at. Translation, we're too stupid to evaluate what we're looking at. So we gotta just trust what the experts say.
I don't think stupidity is the right word.
And I find that to be problematic, the idea, because for a long time on the internet, I mean, I don't know where you were 10 years ago or so, leading up to a few years ago, but for a long time on the internet, a lot of atheists that I encountered always told me, Justin, if you would just do your own research on the creation evolution debate, you would realize that evolution is true, that billions of years is true, and that creationism is false. I was encouraged every step of the way to look at that information for myself. But now I'm being told by mainstream media that I don't have that ability. I don't have the ability to evaluate what I'm looking at.
I think you're misunderstanding. Actually, I have a question first. Are you still a young Earth creationist?
Yep.
Okay, then clearly the article is correct. Now, I don't think that stupidity is the right term, which is your term, not the article's term, at least from the part you read. I don't think stupidity is the right term. Ignorance is fine. I'm ignorant of a lot of things, and I have no problem saying that. I am very ignorant of like astronomy, geology. These are fields I have no expertise in whatsoever. I think they're interesting and neat. I would never try to tell someone who knows more than me about the subject, who's been an expert in it for a long time, no, you're wrong. In biology, however, in evolution, that is a thing I've studied for a long time. Actually, for the last 8 years, I've been doing this channel, and I just got my master's in zoology this past December, and I have read a lot of creationism. RJ Downer, no, I don't know if RJ's watching, have co-authored a book, The Rocks Were There, Volume 1, and we're working on Volume 2, where we are going through dozens and dozens and dozens of different arguments by young Earth creationists, just across the spectrum, on everything from transitional fossils to genetic entropy to what kinds are, to radiometric dating. And consistently, creationists are wrong. And they have, as this article points out, they have overlooked a lot of details, a lot of data, and they need to acknowledge when they may not have the whole case. And I can name entire fields that are virtually ignored by young Earth creationists, like biogeography and biostratigraphy. These are fields that I have seen like a handful of creationists even attempt to deal with. Like, and then when they talk about transitional fossils, like there are some lines about like Tiktaalik or Archaeopteryx or, Lucy the Australopithecus or what have you, that are inevitably wrong. You can do your own research, but you do also need to provisionally acknowledge what the consensus is when you do said research. And if you're coming to a conclusion that is wildly different from what the consensus of experts is, and this is really what my tweet was, then, like this article says, maybe recognize that you don't have the full picture. Like, maybe realize that, it's possible you've overlooked something.
In other words, they're the high priests of reality, and if you believe something that contradicts what they say, then you must be wrong somewhere. That's what I'm getting.
So first of all, you misheard me apparently. So my thesis was on, I looked at iridescence in a particular species of beetle, and so my research was, it was in part confirming, testing, I should say. It was in part testing a study that had been done several years ago, well, like a decade ago, as well as expanding that research into other species which had not been tested. So what I did not do as a person who is, engaging in science, I didn't just say, well, they must be right because they said it. I said, okay, well, we're going to look at what they did. We're going to reconfirm their methods or disconfirm them, because that happens all the time. You can look at retractions and, all sorts of stuff. You can look at the major back and forwards that researchers have, which become very recalcitrant. It's quite funny, actually. But my research was looking at, okay, well, did this guy say that, or this team really, did they look at the right stuff? Are they correct in their analysis? If so, okay. And does this analysis extend to other beetles? Turns out the answer was yes. So I was able to reconfirm their methods and extend that analysis. I did not simply say, well, they said it, so it must be true. Now, in general, in fields where I am not an expert, where I do not have a lot of knowledge, I'm just going to defer to the consensus. Now, there may be issues with said consensus, but I'm going to say, well, provisionally, I'm going to accept that consensus. And we all kind of do that. We all do that for things we agree with, and we don't do that for things we don't agree with. In general, what I just try to do is I try to say what is known, what is not known, what do the experts in this field say, do they agree, do they not agree? That's what I do. Like, I have no expertise in trying to debunk, like, the Big Bang Theory. I don't know any of the math behind it. I'm not an expert in it. But do I understand and know a fair bit about studies in evolution? Yeah. And as I already said, I can and have tested, some of these tests before. So like, I'm perfectly happy with that. That's why I said provisional. It's not believe whatever you're told always. It's hear what they're saying. Do your own research. Go ahead. But also be aware if you're coming to opposite conclusions of what the consensus is. That was, and here I am just restating my tweet.
So, if you go against the consensus, then obviously you're in error somewhere. Is that what I'm getting from that?
Not necessarily. If you are an expert in a field and you are, well, let's take a recent example, epigenetics. So epigenetics is relatively sort of new. It kind of depends on how you define it, but the broadly epigenetics is relatively new. It kind of came into its own in the 90s, the 1990s. So epigenetics is sort of similar in some ways to the earlier idea of like neo-Lamarckism, which is why a lot of biologists like shunned it. They did not like it. But it turns out a bunch of studies came out, like more and more studies came out that were peer reviewed by experts, and they reconfirmed these tests or disconfirmed them if it happened. And it showed that, hey, actually epigenetic mechanisms do happen. Transferases do attach methyl groups to histones, and in some cases that can be transmitted across generations. So that is a thing that can happen, it's not just that one. You can do it with other types of markers too. But basically, they did a whole bunch of different studies on it. And we've been doing these studies for 3 decades now, almost, somewhere around there. And epigenetics is pretty squarely within the modern field of biology. I mean, like, they took something that was an idea that nobody really held seriously, and they went through layers and layers of argumentation and data, and now here we are, and we all accept epigenetics. Like, it's a non-issue now, and that's how all things happen in science.
All right. Sorry,
do you disagree with any of that, or?
Well, I am not knowledgeable enough about that particular topic to have an opinion.
I mean, plate tectonics is another example. Like, you could look at any atomic theory, or like relativity, or whatever. Like, these are all different fields that had people, come up with explanatory mechanisms for a series of points of data, and then they submitted these to their peers. They got it peer reviewed, and over years, I mean, in the case of relativity, right? Einstein. Sorry, not Einstein. Was it Arthur Eddington? I think was his name. The guy who tested that light does actually bend as it goes around, as it goes through space. The planetary bodies have the gravity that affects the path of light. It doesn't go straight; it is actually bent, and that confirmed one of Einstein's postulates, right, within relativity. At least I believe I'm not a physicist, but that's like Einstein made this prediction about what should happen if relativity is true, and it turned out that was true. And so that was a big point in his favor. But of course, more and more papers were published and more data has been accumulated. And now, again, we use relativity every day. We use GPSs, and that relies on relativity. So,
okay. Well, we have talked about only half of the source information behind the tweet of mine that I made in response to you. So now it's time for the other half of that equation, and that would be.
Well, I mean, were you aware of any of those, any of the examples I gave, or are you?
I can go back later and look at your examples and then look into it more. I'm honest enough to admit when I don't know
that's
much
fair.
about a particular topic.
Okay.
But this one I do know about because it's the other half of the information behind the tweet I made.
I don't think I'll be able to access this one because I think I'm out of New York Times articles.
Well, here, I'll send you the archived version I'm
showing. Okay. Cool. Nice.
Yeah. So the article itself is titled, Don't Go Down the Rabbit Hole. Critical thinking as we're taught to do it isn't helping in the fight against misinformation. Came out February 18th, 2021. And so I'm going to read, there's a few paragraphs of importance here that are most relevant to the issue.
Okay.
I'm going to start here on paragraph 3. Misinformation rides the greased algorithmic rails of powerful social media platforms and travels at velocities and in volumes that make it nearly impossible to stop. That alone makes information warfare an unfair fight for the average internet user. But Mr. Caulfield, who is expert in digital literacy from Wazoo, apparently, Wazoo, Vancouver. So that'd be Wazoo V. There you go. Mr. Caulfield argues that the deck is stacked even further against us, that the way we're taught from a young age to evaluate and think critically about information is fundamentally flawed and out of step with the chaos of the internet. We're taught that in order to protect ourselves from bad information, we need to deeply engage with the stuff that washes up in front of us, Mr. Caulfield told me recently. He suggested that the dominant mode of media literacy, if kids get taught any at all, is that you'll get imperfect information and then use reasoning and fix that somehow. But in reality, that strategy can completely backfire. In other words, resist the lure of rabbit holes in part by reimagining media literacy for the internet hellscape we occupy. It's often counterproductive to engage directly with content from an unknown source, and people can be led astray by false information. Influenced by the research of Sam Weinberg, a professor at Stanford, and Sarah McGrew, an assistant professor at the University of Maryland, Mr. Caulfield argued that the best way to learn about a source of information is to leave it and look elsewhere, a concept called lateral reading. For instance, imagine you were to visit Stormfront, a white supremacist message board, to try to understand racist claims in order to debunk them. Even if you see through the horrible rhetoric, at the end of the day, you gave that place however many minutes of your time, Mr. Caulfield said. Even with good intentions, you run the risk of misunderstanding something because Stormfront users are way better at propaganda than you. You won't get less racist reading Stormfront critically, but you might be overloaded by information and overwhelmed. Our current information crisis, Mr. Caulfield argues, is an attention crisis. The goal of disinformation is to capture the attention, and critical thinking is deep attention, he wrote in 2018. People learn to think critically by focusing on something and contemplating it deeply to follow the information's logic and the inconsistencies. The natural human mindset is a liability in an attention economy. It allows grifters, conspiracy theorists, trolls, and savvy attention hijackers to take advantage of us and steal our focus. Whenever you give your attention to a bad actor, you allow them to steal your attention from better treatments of an issue and give them the opportunity to warp your perspective, Mr. Caulfield wrote. One way to combat this dynamic is to change how we teach media literacy. Internet users need to learn that our attention is a scarce commodity that is to be spent wisely. In 2016, Mr. Caulfield met Mr. Weinberg, who suggested modeling the process after the way professional fact-checkers assess information. Mr. Caulfield refined the practice into 4 simple principles. 1. Stop. 2. Investigate the source. 3. Find better coverage. 4. Trace claims, quotes, and media to the original context. Otherwise known as SIFT. Mr. Caulfield walked me through the process using an Instagram post from Robert F. Kennedy Jr., a prominent anti-vaccine activist, falsely alleging a link between the human papillomavirus vaccine and cancer. If this is not a claim where I have a depth of understanding, then I want to stop for a second and before going further, just investigate the source, Mr. Caulfield said. He copied Mr. Kennedy's name in the Instagram post and popped it into Google. See how fast this is, he told me as he counted the seconds out loud. In 15 seconds, he navigated to Wikipedia and scrolled through the introductory section of the page, highlighting with his cursor the last sentence, which reads that Mr. Kennedy is an anti-vaccine activist and conspiracy theorist. Is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. the best unbiased source of information about a vaccine? I'd argue no, and that's good enough to know we should probably just move on, he said. Now, there's another paragraph down here that skips through. Well, it elaborates more on that part of the part of consulting what Wikipedia does.
Okay.
Here it is. The goal isn't to make political judgments or talk students out of a particular point of view, but to try to get them to understand the context of a source of information and make decisions about its credibility. The course is not precious about overly academic sources either. The students are confused when I tell them to try and trace something down with a quick Wikipedia search because they've been told not to do it, she said. Not for research papers, but if you're trying to find out if a site is legitimate or if somebody has a history as a conspiracy theorist and you show them how to follow the page's citation, it's quick and effective, which means it's more likely to be used. As a journalist who can be a bit of a snob about research methods, it makes me anxious to type this advice. Use Wikipedia for quick guidance. Spend less time torturing yourself with complex primary sources. A part of my brain hears this and reflexively worries these methods could be exploited by conspiracy theorists. But listening to Miss Ladam and Mr. Caulfield describe disinformation dynamics, it seems that snobs like me have it backward. Now, in the example that was in the previous section we read above, and we see confirmed here in this 3-paragraph section I just read from, the basic point of the article is that we should not exercise critical thinking skills when it comes to people who contradict the official narrative on important things like vaccines and how to deal with responding to a particular virus that we initially knew nothing about, or at least knew very little about as a collective society. And so what you should do when evaluating a source of information, the example was Robert F. Kennedy Jr., you should just go to Wikipedia and see what it says about him. And if it says that he's bad, well, then in some way he's bad or unreliable, then you should just ignore what he says. And this guy in these last 3 paragraphs I read is me, because I grew up learning from, well, I shouldn't say learning from, being told by teachers and professors and all the academic authorities in my educational history that Wikipedia is not a valid source of information because of its open source nature, because of the fact that entries can all be edited on a whim. And even if it gets corrected over time, the incorrect information that is on the article could be there long enough to create lasting impressions on people. And so because of that, I was always told Wikipedia should just not be used for any kind of research into important topics. Basically, unless it's looking at like a movie you're interested or a book you're interested, you really shouldn't use it for anything important. And yet we have mainstream media telling us a few years ago that actually you should use Wikipedia as a source of information on these kind of important subjects, because you should use it to evaluate whether or not someone's legitimate. But the legitimacy of someone based on their Wikipedia page suffers the same problem as any Wikipedia article. It's an open source thing. Things can be changed. People can lie by omission, which is something that Mark Dice, the conservative content creator, has been experiencing for years. Anytime he tries to get his Wikipedia page updated to reflect all the books that he's done and the analytics of his channel as far as subscribers and total video views, those edits are always removed by whoever's controlling that page. So stuff like that and the open source nature of Wikipedia has always made it an unreliable source of information for important topics. Now, when I use Wikipedia, I generally use it for movies or books if I want to know like plot summaries, but also I use it to look up information on topics regarding evolution, because when I've looked at evolution-related articles or science-related articles on Wikipedia, almost always they've reflected what the current consensus is on those topics. And so I've sometimes used that as a quick reference to see what the mainstream opinion is on a scientific topic. Of course, I also look at other sources as well, just to see if I'm getting wildly different information, or if there's like information that's about it that's just not in Wikipedia. Then obviously I do that, because I went to school for journalism and I have a degree in that, and researching stuff is a lot of what I studied and have been exercising on my channel over the years. But generally, Wikipedia is not reliable. I mean, that's what we've all been taught our whole lives as far as using it as a source of information on serious topics. And yet you have the New York Times telling us that on important topics like whether or not someone's opinion or thoughts or assessment of current events or current events in the pharmaceutical industry are valid, well then just go see what Wikipedia says, and that's all you really need to do. I have a problem with that, based off of the open source nature of Wikipedia and the fact that it can be edited to say really anything you want. And if the editors won't let you correct that information, then you're kind of screwed.
Well, the Wikipedia, they got themselves in trouble and lost a lot of credibility dealing with that Neil deGrasse Tyson issue. You remember?
Yep, I remember that one. Do you remember that one, Jackson Wheat?
I have no idea what you're even talking about. No.
Well, if you want, I can give a quick summary real quick.
I really don't care about Neil deGrasse Tyson. I think this article is broadly like fine. Like in general, both of these articles are kind of making the same point as that I also made, which is like, I mean, they're right. We're in an attention economy, and the attention economy is who can grab your attention. I mean, that's why we have a million different like ads that, have like, women with their breasts out and everything like that, so they can grab your attention and pull you in. That's why we have clickbait. That is clickbait, yeah, but you know what I mean? Like we have all this stuff. The internet is based around an attention economy. So like in general, when people are, again, not experts, these are kind of shorthands. Like, what are shorthand ways you as a normal, 9-to-5 Joe can evaluate claims? Well, you can say, does it fall within the consensus of experts, or another, way you can sort of shorthand this is, well, what does Wikipedia say? And I'll be honest with you, yes, I agree. Wikipedia was always hounded in my academic career. I've kind of come around on it, not least because I have also edited Wikipedia pages myself, and it's actually quite good. And there are very few times I can think of where I read something and went, you sure about that? Like very, very few times, like less than 5. But of course, Wikipedia is not the end all. It's not the be all. As you said, it is open source. So you shouldn't stop at Wikipedia ever. No one should ever stop at Wikipedia. Wikipedia should be your way. If you are diving into something, it should be your springboard. And I actually use it all the time for my videos. I use it as a springboard. I'll look at the Wikipedia page for, well, let's see, we just did the leafcutter ant's tail. So I went Wikipedia and I looked at the page for the leafcutter ants, the tribe Attini, and this gave me a bunch of different things I could look at. And I scrolled down to the bottom where the references are, and I looked at what their sources are. And for me, that's really the material I want. I want those technical sources at the bottom. I don't want to just read the Wikipedia article. But in general, most things I've seen on Wikipedia are really fine. Like, Wikipedia is so dry with most of the facts that, like, it's almost boring. It's fine. Like, it gives decent overviews of most stuff. And again, this article is just kind of saying, as a shorthand look at Wikipedia. But again, I feel like I'm just going in circles. Yeah, if you're really wanting to deep dive on something and you have time to deep dive into it, use Wikipedia as a springboard. Go to the article, but go down to the bottom, see what the references are. Then go read those references and see, and then you can compare for yourself. Well, does it comport with the Wikipedia article, or does the Wikipedia article say something, diametrically opposed to what the citation is for? That could happen. But I mean, in general, both these articles are just like, if you're just a normal person and you're not an expert, here are some rather easy, like, shorthands you can use. And in general, okay, like, that's fine. Okay, I don't have a problem with that.
So let me throw a hypothetical at you. So let's say that, well, you said you agreed with the general line of argumentation that the New York Times article laid out as far as Wikipedia and how to use it for dealing with important stuff like that. Well, hypothetically, let's say...
Sure, as a springboard.
Well, hypothetically, let's say that you're someone who is called a conspiracy theorist because you have a position regarding a current drug or a current virus floating around that goes against the consensus opinion, basically, for lack of a better term. And your Wikipedia page basically says that you're just an anti-this activist regarding that topic. And then that's what's known about you on Wikipedia for a couple years. And then you find out later on, you meaning like you and maybe the society who's interested in that topic or event or field,
whoever
finds out later on that conspiracy theorist ended up being right about everything he said regarding that particular subject. And yet his Wikipedia article says that he's just a crazy conspiracy
theorist. I don't know a
theorist,
single
basically.
example in which that has ever happened.
That's why I said hypothetical. If this hypothetical,
sure, if hypothetically that were to happen, if that person, turned out to be right, then I would think that the public opinion on that person would shift, and everyone would be like, "Oh, hey, he was right," or she, whatever, and then they go change the article. Sure, I have no problem with updating your beliefs about someone should new evidence come out. There's nothing wrong with that.
All right, let's expand the hypothetical then. Let's say you've gotten to that point you just talked about, and you've made the point to the Wikipedia editors of the article, hey, this guy turned out to be right. Maybe we should take out the sentence that says he's a anti-crazy conspiracy theorist regarding this.
Sure.
And then the editors, in turn, don't allow that to be taken out.
Well, if they were to do that, if they would not change their position based on any evidence, then that would be bad, and that would reflect poorly on them. And they would that would probably therefore reflect poorly on the company they work for. In this case, if it were Wikipedia, that would reflect poorly.
And this hypothetical example, by the way, is the Neil deGrasse Tyson incident, because his Wikipedia page says that he's an atheist, despite the fact that he's come out on video multiple times in a variety of outlets saying that he's not an atheist and explaining why. And yet every time someone tries to edit that part out of his bio that he's an atheist, it keeps getting put right back in by the editors.
Well, one that has absolutely nothing to do with the example you gave. Actually, it says right here, hold on. Actually, in the same interview, Tyson with Big Think, Tyson mentioned that he edited Wikipedia's entry on him to include the fact that he is an agnostic. Quote, I'm constantly claimed by atheists. I find this intriguing. In fact, on my wiki page, I didn't create the wiki page. Others did, and I'm flattered that people cared enough about my life to assemble it. It says Neil deGrasse Tyson is an atheist. I said, well, that's not really true. Neil deGrasse Tyson is agnostic. I went back. Neil deGrasse Tyson is an atheist. Within a week, what's up with that? All right, I have to word it a little differently. I said, okay, Neil deGrasse Tyson, widely claimed by atheists, is actually agnostic. I mean, that's right here. It's right there. I can't agree to the claims by atheists that I'm one of the community. I don't have the time, energy, interest in conducting myself that way. I'm not trying to convert people. I don't care. Okay, what's the issue there?
Yeah, so I'm just saying at one point in the past, that was the case. The second half of the hypothetical I described.
I mean, he wasn't being a conspiracy theorist. This had nothing to do with conspiracy theories.
No, but I was getting multiple principles explained to you to see where you stood on them. They weren't necessarily related to each other.
My issue here is entirely with the people who would not change it, despite him saying that he didn't identify with this community. And they were in the wrong on that. Yeah,
and that's what I'm glad to hear, because the way that they've done that, I don't know if it says today that he's an atheist or not, but I know at one point
it says he's agnostic.
Well, I'm glad that they kept that, but for a long time they wouldn't allow that edit to be made. But
I'm glad that they changed.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that you're not a fan of Wikipedia editors refusing to change things in light of new and true information.
I don't think anyone is. I don't think anyone would defend the notion that people shouldn't change something when new evidence comes forward. I don't think anyone would defend that.
I just wish they'd do the same thing for Mark Dice and let him update his channel's analytics on his Wikipedia page.
I don't know who that is or the story behind that, but regardless, obviously I don't. If a claim is wrong, it should be fixed. I think that's just kind of generally true. So,
okay, just checking the comments. Looks like nothing new.
Okay.
Well, we've been going for an hour and 10 minutes. I believe that. Well, I know that we initially talked about me being on your channel as well. So
yeah, sure. If you want to come on, that's fine with me. Yeah.
Is your availability generally the same as what you're doing now?
Thursday. Thursday is my stream day. That's basically the best day that I can carve out with my schedule right now, because my schedule sucks. Life just is what it is. So at 7 p.m. Central on Thursday is when I have my stream. And if you want to come on, be happy to have you.
So you only stream on those days? You don't have any other availability?
Well, I mean, if you knew a particular day, really, I can't do Monday, Tuesday, or Saturday, really. But we could potentially work out a different day. I mean, if you want to send me a message and say hey, here are some dates that work for me, I can look those over and see my schedule and see which one of those might fit. If that works for you.
Yeah, I'll have to do that. Thursdays can work for me, but that early in the day just doesn't work for me because of my job. So
And that's fair.
you
I
can
totally
relate. You
understand.
can relate to that, I'm sure.
Yeah, I totally understand. I do have a question. Like,
Oh yeah, and before you continue,
oh shoot, go ahead. Sorry.
this is the part of the show where you're actually allowed to ask me stuff. This is not
Okay.
like grill Jackson Wheat the whole time kind of thing. There's actual
Oh,
conversation here.
that's fine with me. I've been on shows, in either way. Um, uh, I guess my question is like, do you disagree with the articles? I mean, I assume you do, but like, what specifically? Because my interpretation of that is these are just shortcuts or shorthands if you don't have the time to do the research. If you do have the time to do the research, then do the research. Like that seems to be my interpretation based on what we've read. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, in terms of the New York Times article, my upbringing with what I was taught about Wikipedia and what I know to be true about Wikipedia
Mm-hmm.
completely contradicts their methodology. I don't think it should be applied to anything at all, much less important subjects about current events or current dissidents in politics or science. And as far as the Forbes one, that kind of contradicts what the atheists have been telling me for years, because the evidence for evolution, I've been told, is so strong that even someone like me, if I did my own research, could figure it out. So when I
Mm-hmm.
see people coming along the mainstream media, all these years later and saying, oh, by the way, when it comes to stuff like this, you don't have the expertise to properly evaluate what you're seeing. So you just need to trust what experts are saying. When I see that, I get really bothered by that, because any normal person interprets that as you're too stupid to do your own research, so therefore trust the experts. And I know you don't like the use of the word stupid, but I'm simplifying it to a language that just about everyone on the earth can understand.
I mean,
But you can,
like I said, I don't disagree with that in terms of like subjects that I'm not an expert in. If I, like am reading about history, for instance, I'm just going to see what the consensus is. Like that's going to be what I look for, or the consensus in astronomy or chemistry or whatever. And I'm just going to kind of go with that provisionally because I really don't have the time in my day to to investigate very deeply every single claim I come across. Some I can kind of, there's a set of claims where I can say like whether I'm very sure that this is true or this is false, and there's a larger set of things that I'm like, maybe that could be true, I guess. But like we all kind of have ways of like shorthanding things. Like there are always people in our lives who we look at and we go, yeah, most of what he says is true. So I'm gonna, kind of take him at face value. And there are people who we say like, I don't trust a single thing that comes out of that guy's mouth. So, like we all kind of do that. Like I don't really broadly have an issue with that. I mean, like we all just kind of do it as part of human nature, I guess. Okay, well, so you keep referencing the fact that you say atheists or evolutionists or whoever for a long time told you to do your own research on evolution, and you are still not convinced that evolution is true. Am I correct?
No,
in
not
that
really.
assessment?
It's mostly the philosophical problems that come from the evolution paradigm of history that you're using science to try and justify. Sorry, hit the wrong button.
Oh, you're fine. Like I'm not a philosophic person, but like it is my understanding of. Well, I suppose. What do you mean in particular? Like what examples are you looking at?
Well, when you look at the evolution paradigm of history that science is being used to support by evolutionists and atheists, the paradigm basically says that evolution happened so long ago that no beings with the ability to make records of what they saw existed when it happened. And the process takes so long, even on a punctuated equilibrium type timescale, that even that it takes too long to occur for anybody to write it down as a historical occurrence, set up an experiment to verify that this is indeed a naturally occurring phenomenon and not just, some freak accident,
Oh, I don't buy
That
that
is-
at all. Yeah, I don't buy that line of argument. Oh my god, it did it again. Ha ha. Okay, hold
We
on.
can
just go
still
ahead and
hear you
refresh.
whenever your camera does that, by the way.
Haha.
there you are.
I figured out though, Brett, you were right when you mentioned the change it in your settings. If I just change it like back and forth, it fixes it. So I guess it like refreshes the camera without me having to leave. So that's cool. Did not know that. Thank you.
Always glad to help.
I will use that in future streams. So yeah, for instance, like, well, let's think about what the definition of the word evolution is, right? In biology, the population genetics way that we use that term is a change in allelic frequencies in populations over generations, right? That's how we use it in terms of population genetics to measure evolution over generational time scales, right? I'm sure you've come across that definition before. Okay.
There's a lot of different definitions of evolution.
Sure. I mean,
stellar, chemical, planetary.
Well, okay, but none of those are
biology.
Yeah, but within biology,
yeah.
So yeah, I don't know anything about stellar nucleosynthesis or anything like that. So within biology, we have this kind of central idea of changing allelic frequencies over generations, and that gives rise both to adaptations as well as new species. So I do really hate when people say, because I've heard it, I've read it many times in like Dawkins would say it in some of his older books. He'd say things like oh yeah, evolution it takes way too long for any one person to witness, and so yeah, like that's why we use the fossil record. But like we do use the fossil record for long time scales, but we can absolutely see evolution on human time scales. I mean, every step of evolution every step of evolution, every mechanism of evolution, we can like witness on human time scales. I mean, like the processes by which new allelic variants arise, right? Those are mutations and recombination. That's how you get new alleles. Obviously we witness those. We witness those every single generation. There are countless experiments on natural and sexual selection, genetic drift, gene flow. We've witnessed the origin of new species in nature. And my favorite example is Procambarus virginalis, the marbled crawfish. And that's the process of evolution writ small, is new alleles undergoing selection or genetic drift. It's not always selection. Zach Hancock would yell at me if he heard me say that. And then this leads to the formation of new species. And when you look at evolution, that's just it. That's the process. And so like each of these mechanisms has been witnessed, right? And so I would take issue with somebody like Dawkins saying evolution takes way too long for anybody to see, it happened way before anybody was around. Yeah, I would take issue with Dawkins, and I'm pretty sure I have in him saying that.
So is it fair to say that you believe that changes within a species or changes within a family, which is basically what microevolution is, over time, that always results in macroevolution?
So that's not what microevolution is. So microevolution is specifically changes within a species. So changes below the level species, not within a family. A family is a greater grouping of species, actually a grouping of orders. So there's the reason that we have these terms, micro and macroevolution. I don't know if you're really familiar with the history of evolutionary biology, but there was this big debate going on in the 1920s, 1930s, which basically led to the neo-Darwinian synthesis. And part of this big debate was between the, like you had the Darwinists on the one hand, and then like the mutationists on the other. So essentially you had people who would say all evolution from like, your new allele arises, and you have gradual mutations that add up successively over generations, and eventually that's how you get new species. So you have the Darwinists on one hand. On the other hand, you have these people like the mutationists, like Yuri Filipchenko, who is the guy who coined both of those terms in 1927. And he was a member of this camp where the argument was, yes, you could have small variations within a species, but you could never have variations within a species leading to another species. The only way you could ever have a new species is if you had a macromutational leap. So you had a big new change. And then then if you have that within a population, that wins out against the other variants, and that's what leads to the formation of new species. And that's why we have two different terms. So we have micro and macro evolution to distinguish those different types of processes. Now, while it is true that macromutations can happen, they are by no means needed for new species to arise. I mean, like we know that now. Gould and Eldridge actually tried sort of reviving a bit of that when they postulated punctuated equilibrium in the 1970s with their idea of like chromosomal inversions is what's causing the formation of new species, which you really don't need chromosomal inversions or populational bottlenecks. You don't need those for new species. I mean, you can read like Jerry Coyne in his speciation textbook, and it goes all through that. But you have those processes, they're totally arbitrary. Like the differences between these processes is totally arbitrary, and it's based on a now long extinct debate in evolution. So the way that Filipchenko defined macroevolution was genetic change at or above the level of species. So the formation of new species is macroevolution to Filipchenko. That's how those words are defined historically.
But those species fall within the families that the original species comes from.
Well, a family is a totally arbitrary designation. So are orders. An order could be 2 species, 3, 4, 10. These are totally arbitrary categories. There's no, or sorry, what did I say? Orders? Genus. I meant genera. I don't know why I was saying orders. My bad. My apologies.
Genus.
Yeah. So these genera, there could be 10 different genera within a family. And like, and then there can be 10 families within an order, or 15 or 20, or like, these are all completely arbitrary. There's nothing in particular separating genera from each other in the way that we have metrics for separating species from each other. Does that make sense?
Yes. Basically, I'm understanding that changes within species is something we do see happening, and I agree. Of course, if you know creationist material, you know they don't disagree with that either. And
also changes from one species to another.
Yeah, but that never goes beyond the family change.
So again, family is totally arbitrary. That word doesn't mean anything. It's just a designation we humans came up with to define a group, like a group of genera. Like that's it. That's all that term means. If you want to look, you could look at like literally any group. And creationists try doing this. As I said, RJ and I wrote an entire chapter on them trying to define kinds. And they don't really use family. They use family sometimes, but other times they lower it to a genus. Other times they raise it to an order. Sometimes they just say like, oh, an entire kingdom is a kind. Like the difference between them is really depending on like more of what they're personally willing to allow. There's no metric for it. It's not like there's a particular genetic metric or morphological or fossil or whatever. There just isn't any.
Well, the reason why I say families is because in the documentary Evolution versus God, one of the evolutionist professors who was being interviewed by Ray Comfort kept using the word kind. And so the evolutionist professor said that basically the closest term they had for that in our modern vernacular in terms of how we classify animals was families. And I just assumed that was correct. No. It was, I forget who the guy is, but it wasn't P.Z. Myers.
Because I remember P.Z. was in that documentary. He was one of the guys Ray talked to, and Ray very dishonestly cut that a lot of his answer out. He was like tried to make it look like P.Z. couldn't answer his question,
but it wasn't P.Z. though. It was a different guy.
Well, at any rate,
and I just assumed that he was right because I never saw any kind of dissent from creationists on that.
Well, if you look at, for instance,
oh, sorry, I was going to ask CTOR. Is that the one where P.Z. Myers says he's a fish?
I mean, we are fish.
That one.
But, fish also doesn't really mean anything, but that's another conversation. Anyway, so the kind doesn't mean anything the same way that family doesn't mean anything. These are just arbitrary terms that we came up with. Because when you look at organisms, they are nested hierarchically. Species nest within a genus, genera nest within a family, families nest within an order, and so on. This goes all the way up the chain to domains, which again are arbitrary constructs. These are just ways of reflecting nested hierarchies, which a creationist, Carolus Linnaeus, came up with. And he could not explain why these nested hierarchies existed. And he wrote about this it was not Systema Naturae, it was one of his other works later on. But he could not explain why it didn't stop. It's not like the nested hierarchies went up to family and then stopped, and then there was just no nested hierarchy above that. Like they went all the way up to kingdom. And he was baffled by that. course, Darwin came along later and explained that. It's common ancestry.
So basically, micro evolution is, you defined it as change within a species, which is something we observe all the time. The problem that creationists have pointed out traditionally is that that's literally the only kind of evolution that we've ever observed in terms of the natural world and writing it down. What do you mean by that?
I mean, I just said, I gave you an example of one species becoming a new species. So Procambarus virginalis, the marbled crawfish, speciated from Procambarus phallax, the slough crawfish, and this happened in the 1990s. I mean, there have been lots of examples of fruit. There have been loads of experiments with fruit flies dating back to at least the 60s, I think. Yeah, Theodosius Dobzhansky with his Lanos A fruit flies, like Drosophila. I want to say pseudo obscura, but I'm not positive. At any rate, he had his fruit flies, which you could subject them to selection, and then after several generations, they could no longer interbreed with each other, and that's
I don't think you're understanding what I'm saying, because I literally just granted that new species can come from previously existing species. The problem is all the other types of evolution, we don't see it in observational sense because they're historical science in nature. It's something that takes so long to occur, allegedly, that we can't just set up camp somewhere, observe it happen, write it down, set up an experiment to verify it. Basically, almost all of evolution falls under the realm of historical science, where you have to use it as a model to interpret what you're seeing in the world.
So here's where I yes and no. So like a lot of evolution, and we're just talking about biology here. We're not talking about astrochemistry and all this other stuff. We're talking about just evolutionary biology. So yes, in that sense, evolution is used as a framework by which we understand and interpret, like the stratigraphy of certain fossils, right? But this also gives us the ability to make specific predictions about what we should find within the fossil record, right? So if, for instance, this goes back to like Haldane in the, I don't even remember when he made that comment. The Precambrian rabbit, for instance, we can make predictions, right? We can say, okay, if evolution's false, if our understanding of how phylogeny and stratigraphy interact with each other or corroborate each other, if that's wrong, then we should be able to look for specific examples. And in that instance, he gave the Precambrian rabbit. Now, should there be rabbits in the Precambrian, or we should find fossils of rabbits or mammals or birds or reptiles or literally like any, almost any type of animal in the Precambrian. If evolution isn't true, we should be able to find all these things there. We don't. Instead, what we find is a gradual flowering out of lineages. You find at the very latest Precambrian, you find very simple multicellular animals. And then as you cross over into the Cambrian, you find crown lineages, things like early arthropods, early chordates. As you go a little bit higher, you found the first jawed vertebrates, and then as you go a bit higher, so on and so on. First lobe-finned and ray-finned fish. And that is a corroboration of, those things corroborate each other. And those should give us a prediction or predictions. And that's how we found things like Diarthrognathus, Microraptor, Tiktaalik, Spicamyrma. Like these are all things that were predicted. Darwin predicted Archaeopteryx in Origin of Species, and it was found just 2 years later, and he included it in later editions of Origin.
You guys mind, since we're getting towards the end of this?
I'm sorry. I apologize.
No, it's cool. I'm enjoying listening to you and TTR, so it's cool. There's no hate there. I was wondering though, since we're getting towards the end of this, if I would be able to ask a couple things to both of you.
Sure.
Yes,
all right. So you brought up earlier, about 5 minutes ago, the fruit flies. Do you see a difference between natural evolution over that of genetic splicing and modification done by scientists in a lab?
I mean, none of the examples I mentioned involve genetic splicing.
Well, I just went and looked it up. I'm using kind of an AI search, and it can also be showed on Google.
I mean, I'll give you the exact paper that I was talking about. It was... Hold on.
Well, this right here, the information states that the fruit flies were modified and genetically spliced.
Not in the 1960s, they were not. That was way before we knew how to do that.
TTR, do you understand the difference between genetic?
Sorry,
modification over that of actual natural evolution?
Yeah, 1966 was when this came out. No one had even sequenced genes yet, let alone knew how to splice them.
Hey, Brett, can you put the link in the private chat so I can look at it? The one you're looking at.
Sure.
Here.
I'll give you a bunch of different sources. I'm going to give
There
you
you go.
the main search on it. Let's see. The link's
So
going
Paul
to probably be the size of Texas, but here you go.
So I just gave right there. That's the paper that I was referring to, Spontaneous Origin of an Incipient Species in the Drosophila polystorum Complex. So it was polystorum, not pseudobscura, wrong P word. But that was Dobzhansky and Pavlovsky, 1966. This is way, way before anybody knows anything about genetic splicing.
So that's what Brett's referring to is the first thing that comes up on Google. He's asking if there's a difference that you can see between that and fruit flies that, go through the natural evolution process.
Is this alternative splicing? Because that's not human induced. That's just a thing your genes do.
Well, I definitely agree that there's some experiments done. There's some natural experiments done, but a lot of this with the fruit flies is genetic splicing and modification. And that's why I'm asking you both. Do you understand what the difference between nature actually causing a change and human interference?
So none of the examples I gave have anything to do with splicing, with genetic splicing, because again, like the example of the crawfish was a polyploid event that resulted in a new species, and then, like I said, the 1966. That's way before anybody knows anything about this. In this, let me see. I'm gonna take a look at this. Okay, so a gene associated with by either removing it from males, giving it to females. So as a result, for example, males with for remove lose some. Okay, male-specific course behaviors. Yeah, gain some of those behaviors. Yeah. Okay, this is pretty common. I've seen research like this before. That dysfunction was also conserved across species. Okay. That's with CRISPR. We can now add fruit to females and other species, see whether the gene functions the same way. Okay. I mean, like, we can do phylogenies of genes, right? We can do not just phylogenies of species, but phylogenies of individual genes. And if all the genes in one particular species look one way, and then you have one gene that's completely different from everything else, then the researcher is going to be like, something's a little bit off here. But in this, they're not talking about, they're not causing new species, at least from what I can see. They are looking at the effects of this gene in different species, which is totally fine. I mean, there are really cool experiments with like moths where you can take the pheromone receptor away, and then they're not like interested in the normal or like the males are not interested in the females anymore, because the females are like, here's my pheromones, why aren't you coming over here? And the guys are like, I don't see anything, I don't smell anything. I mean, that kind of stuff happens, and I think that's pretty cool. Neuroethology is that field. It's actually really interesting. I mean, like,
if you were to, you guys did say and give me approval to be able to ask a few questions, but if you were to go back in time and find a transitional fossil, how would you know the difference between a creature that might have been deformed or perhaps was born with a defection over that of something that actually transitioned?
Oh, so I mean, like, we find examples of deformation in the fossil record, right? Like, you can compare if you have multiple individuals of one species and one of them has like a club foot or something like that, you can be like, oh, this one has a club foot. That's very unusual. That's why there was a debate over like, are Homo floresiensis, are they like, do they just have a tiny head disorder or whatever, or like it turns out no, they don't. They're just a miniaturized species of human.
If something is born defective or it has some kind of deformity, would you consider that some kind of part evolution in your view?
Well, no, I mean, I don't know what, like, deformities generally aren't for something to be important in evolution, it would need to be passed from one generation to another, and it's going to be doing that because either by random chance, because it provides essentially no benefit or harm to the organism, or it is being positively selected, and that's why it's being passed on. If it's negative, then I doubt it's going to be passed on for very long.
I think what TTOR was trying to get at earlier is a majority of Christians, at least in my perception, in my opinion that I've talked to, they agree that there are some small observable things. What the problem is whenever a scientist claims that a whale managed to come up on land, turn into a dog-like creature, run around for a couple million years,
Backwards.
and then turn itself around back in the water. These are the kind of things that normally, you don't think that happened.
No, that objectively did not happen. No one's claiming that.
What do you think of that, TTOR?
Well, maybe not that particular ending of that, but there is definitely a teaching in the evolutionary paradigm of history that families of a particular kind eventually become families of a completely different kind through the macroevolution process over a really, 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 really long time.
Sure.
And that's the part that we have a problem with, because that's something that cannot be observed. Even in principle, it can't be observed. And so we have to have faith that our experts are telling us the truth about everything related to that. We have to have faith that they're right.
Before you guys continue, because you said that didn't happen, I just provided a link that actually shows
that a whale became a dog and then became a whale again.
It became a creature that looks a lot like a dog.
No,
and then
okay,
it
so
went
this
back
is
into the water. Well, we're going to show the imagery as well.
Yeah, you're talking. So they were never whales first, and then became the dog-like creature, and then became whales again. They are artiodactyls first, that then later evolved into whales. And how do we know that whales are artiodactyls?
No, it claims that they originally started out in the water like most creatures and went up on land. But this particular creature went back in. It's one of the reasons why they claim that the thing actually has a hole on top of its head. Go ahead.
No. Hold on. Those are all way, way different things. You're conflating a whole lot of different things here. Okay. First of all, when tetrapods, as in the group of amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals, that group is descended from a tiktaalik-like thing 400 million years ago that was not whale-sized. It was like Tiktaalik's like, it's not very big. It's fairly small. Then like 100 and, or not 100, like 300 and 50 million years later, then you have the ancestors of whales who then, so right there, for instance, so that bottom guy that they're down on the left, that's like Indohyus or Pakicetus. Then the next guy to his right, it's like Ambulocetus, and you've got like Rhodocetus, and then like Dorodon or something. So there are lots of really good ways that we know that whales are artiodactyls. Genetics is like kind of the biggest one. What's really cool is whales actually have particular genes. So you have things that are called orphan genes, which are restricted to particular taxonomic groups. So whales actually share certain orphan genes. You know, there are some orphan genes that are within certain species. Like our human species has a particular set of orphan genes. There are some that we share with chimps. Then there are some we share with gorillas and so on. Whales are the same way. There's some whales only have within that one species, like the killer whale. He's only got certain orphan genes within that one species. Then there are some orphan genes that are shared among all toothed whales. Yep, there's a good picture of it. And then there are some orphan genes that are shared between whales and hippos to the exclusion of all other mammals. And we have to ask ourselves why. Why would that be the case? Unless they share a more recent common ancestor than they do with other artiodactyls. Now, there are orphan genes that all artiodactyls share, and there are orphan genes that all mammals share. So, but yeah, this is a good picture. So you got I can't even read that.
PTR, this is something that your buddy that you guys were talking about earlier has actually talked about quite a bit. Mr. Hovind, he actually shows video footage of scientists actually showing them go from fish-like creature up onto land and then turning around and going back in the water millions of years later and becoming
350 million years later. Yeah, I mean, we're talking about enormous amounts of time later. Yeah, I mean.
But you originally said this never happened. I said
a whale becoming a dog, becoming a whale never happened. That no, like
I said
on.
a dog-like creature. It looks like a dog. I didn't say it was a dog, though.
You said a whale became a dog, became a whale. That's what I'm objecting to. That is
Became a dog-like creature. I heard Brett say that too. So
okay, so we're going to ignore the whale
stereotype.
part first. Okay, whatever. Anyway, so yeah, there is a massive difference between the oversimplification that you gave and what the actual narrative, I guess you might want to say, by biologist or paleontologist is. So this little guy, Pakicetus, which has a number of characteristics that it shares exclusively with whales and nothing else on the planet, is part of the lineage that gave rise to modern whales. Like I don't really see what an issue with what the issue with that is.
You don't see an issue with a land creature going into the water and developing the ability to actually live in the ocean after living on land for 350 million years.
Do you think seals did that?
If the seals are out too long, they will dry up and they get sick.
So did seals develop the ability to be amphibious?
I think that we all, if any of you in here has ever been fishing before, ladies and gentlemen, you know that fish don't do too well on the outside of land.
I mean, you didn't answer the question. Did seals originate or descend from an ancestor who was originally completely terrestrial?
Well, I am like TTOR in this. I don't go along with evolution and species changing and all that. I don't believe that the whale ever came up on land and turned into this.
Changing?
I'm talking about what the claim is of science.
I already gave several examples of species changing. Hold on a minute. You don't agree with species changing?
I don't believe that whales turn into dogs. I don't think they're druid creatures.
I also agree whales didn't turn into dogs, but nobody claims that.
Sure, but the principle behind it is what he's talking about.
So the principle behind this is that you have a set of organisms, these semi-aquatic artiodactyls, so these even-hoofed mammals, who have a unique set of characteristics. Pakicetus and Indohyus and Ambulocetus have a set of characteristics that are exclusively unique to artiodactyls. For example, they have a unique pulley astragalus ankle bone. There are no other animals on the planet that have this unique pulley astragalus or pulley-shaped astragalus ankle bone. Now, it's really, really odd if God decided, you know what I'm going to do today? I'm going to make an animal that has some characteristics of whales, like the involucrum and the particular set of the dentition, as well as a number of other characteristics of the skull that it shares uniquely with like basilosaurids, as well as a number of characteristics that it shares exclusively with artiodactyls, bar anything else. And they're just not related, like at all. Like that's just a coincidence. Like really? Come on.
That looks kind of like a dog, doesn't it? I'd keep one of those around the house.
I'm just saying, this has unique characteristics of artiodactyls, even hoof mammals, and unique characteristics of cetaceans. And so we would do the exact same thing we do with literally every other group of organisms. We would say, hey, based on its suite of morphological characteristics, it belongs in this particular group.
So I think to bring this show to a close, I would like to ask something of Jackson Wheat before we get out of here. Jackson, have you heard of Douglas Fukuyima's 1983 book, Evolution on Trial?
Heard of it, yes.
Basically, for lack of a better term, an apologetics book defending the truthfulness of evolution in deep time and debunking creationism. It's one of those books.
Sure.
But in this book, there was a section where he actually made a prediction regarding the fossil record. He said that if evolution was true, then when you look at the fossil record, you should see a plethora and consistent line of transitional fossils going from beginning to end. And that if creationism was true, then what you should see is that the vast majority of animals and animal groups should enter the fossil record fully formed and fully developed without any evidence whatsoever of an evolutionary ancestry. And then around the same time, or maybe like a year or two later, the whole Cambrian explosion thing became a driving force in the scientific community. And the basic idea of the Cambrian explosion is that we do see the vast majority of animals and animal groups entering the fossil record fully formed, fully developed, without any evidence of an evolutionary ancestry. Richard Dawkins himself, in his 1986 book, The Blind Watchmaker, commented on that and said, yeah, that's what we see. I'm sure those creationists are delighted, kind of like in a sarcastic kind of way, knowing Richard Dawkins. But the idea that evolution can be true based off of the fossil record doesn't seem to be really true. And the idea that there's no creative power or creative predictions behind creationism seems to be false as well, because an evolutionist predicted what the fossil record would look like if creationism was true, and evolutionists confirmed that the fossil record does look like that. And that's why you see transitional fossils being hailed and paraded from time to time when people think they've found one, because there's really not a whole lot of them.
I'm so glad you brought up the Cambrian. Let's dive right into it. I actually happen to have read a lot of papers about the Cambrian, and I've read Darwin's Doubt, and I've read a bunch of other works by Gunter Beckley and other young Earth creationists and intelligent design proponents on this thing, and so I'm quite familiar with the arguments that they make. Well, arguments is a strong word. But anyway, actually, when we do look at the Cambrian explosion, we do see not just one, but actually a number of different radiations of organisms. So let's take one of my favorite examples. So the arthropods. So the phylum Arthropoda and its crown members show up in this time period. So they show up in the Cambrian, but they don't all show up at once because they don't just come out of nowhere. At the start of the Cambrian, one of the groups you see is this group called Isoxeida. I can put that here in our side chat. You're free to look that up. So Isoxeida is one of the groups of either very derived stem arthropods, or it's a very basal crown arthropod. And these are one of the first. These are actually the first body fossils that you find in the early Cambrian. And then a bit later, you find other groups of basal crown arthropods, things like Fuxianhuiids. You find trilobites coming in at the middle early Cambrian, and then you have a diversification of the artiopodans. So the group it's a group of trilobite-like critters, but they're not trilobites. You have them radiate a bit later in the Cambrian, and then you have the diversification of crustaceans kind of towards the tail end of the Cambrian, and then you get that really a big diversification starting in the Ordovician, which is part of Gobi, the Great Ordovician biodiversification event. I promise I can speak. And then from there, you have diversification of those groups, and you eventually get in the either the Insularian or the start of the Devonian, you get stem hexapods, and then you get crown hexapods a little bit later in the, well, I should say, a bit later in the late Devonian, and then you get the diversification of insects. So like that whole thing seems really, really evolutionary. That doesn't seem to me. And let's go before. You said it started at the Cambrian. Well, if you go right before the Cambrian, if you go to the Ediacaran, you again see the stepwise transitions. You see at the start of the Ediacaran, we have things like the rangiomorphs, which are these frond-like guys, which are considered eumetazoans, are considered stem eumetazoans. We have sponges, and then we have cnidarians a little bit later on. We have stem bilaterians, and then after we have stem bilaterians, we have crown bilaterians right before we get to the end of the Ediacaran. And then right after we have the crown bilaterians, we have a big flowering outward of crown bilaterians in the Cambrian. And then we can go back further, like you have primitive eukaryotes as far back as 2 billion years ago, and like I'm not really sure what the issue is.
Jackson, do you believe that our ancestors existed during the time of the dinosaurs?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like that doesn't have anything to do with what I just said, but yeah, I like in this example that I just gave, or that you brought up, we have stepwise like acquisition of characters leading up to the Cambrian, and then we have the stepwise acquisition of characters during the Cambrian. So in our own lineage, the chordates, we have Millikenmingia, and we have Pikaia, and we have the Vetulicolians, and we have like all these like Stemechinoderms and things like that that are all appearing in the Cambrian. We have the radiation of those groups. And then once we get to the Ordovician, for our chordates, we have early jawless fish, and then we have jaws developing in the Silurian, then we have the split between ray and lobe-fin fish. Like you say, we don't really see, all we see is things, just popping up fully formed. Like,
well, we also
what are you relying on? Like when you say that,
see that there's many species out there that have never went through any kind of transition, that they're still the same looking that they've always been.
So that's not true, but also that I would like a response from TTOR before I get to that. So like, in the face of what I
actually have an entire video on that with the imagery and the video footage of it, but that's cool. Go ahead, TTOR.
I'm happy to get into specifics of things like the horseshoe crabs if you want, because that's one that I've had multiple arguments with people on. But anyway, go ahead.
So, as in the greatest of ironies, here's the Wikipedia article on the
Yep, go
Cambrian
ahead.
explosion.
Mhm.
Says the Cambrian explosion, also known as Cambrian radiation or Cambrian diversification, is an interval of time approximately 538.8 million years ago in the
Mhm.
Cambrian period of the early Paleozoic, when a sudden radiation of complex life occurred and practically
Mhm.
all major animal phyla started appearing in the fossil record. It lasted for about 13 to 25 million years and
Mhm.
resulted in the divergence of most metazoan phyla. The event
Yeah.
was accompanied by major diversification, other groups of organisms as well. So
Uh-huh.
13 to 25 million years
But do you know what
is
that's
a
a
long
reference to?
time,
So
but
do you know what
that's
that's a
considered
reference to?
quick. I think I'd like to finish my sentence first before you ask. 13 to 25 million years is a long time, but in the evolutionary time scale, it really isn't all that long. So if you think about it for a little bit, you realize that the Cambrian explosion conceptually does teach that practically all major animals and animal groups appeared in the fossil record
Do
in
you
a really
know?
quick succession
Do
without
you
really any prior evolutionary
do you
history.
know what that time period is referencing? I'll give you a hint. It's not the entire Cambrian radiation event. So that time period, 13 to 25 million years, is based on the lower boundary of the Attabanian layer. And what it is referencing is the period of the greatest growth of species diversification, not the whole species diversification. Actually, there's a really good paper on that. I believe it's Zaravlev and Wood. Zaravlev and Wood, I think it's 2018. I could be, yes, the two phases of the Cambrian explosion. Here we go. This paper has a really good figure. Yep, here we go. Well, this is one of them. This is not the only one. Can I screen share for a moment? Please.
Sure, just give me 1 second.
Sure.
All about diversity of thought here. Let's see. Wait. You have to actually do the screen share. It
Oh,
goes
okay. I got you.
present, share screen,
Okay, I got
and
you.
then you choose your screen sharing option, and then I put it on.
Okay, I got you. Okay, so you see, if you pull the, well, that's not you, that's me. I'm a fool. Okay, so here we go. If you look at this section right here, so as you can see, these are bilaterian. So these are the organisms, the animals that are bilaterally symmetric. Now, the period of 13 to 25 million years, depending on the base of the Attabanian, that's referring to basically this part right here where you have the greatest like increase. It is not referring to the entire thing. In fact, you can see you have stem groups prior to that, and then you have crown groups appearing about here in the early Cambrian, and then you have a very large radiation that occurs following the inception of these crown groups. So it's not the origin, the Cambrian. So, and Stephen Meyer did this exact same thing in Darwin's Doubt. He tried playing up the Cambrian explosion as the entirety of the event was this 13 or so million years old. He even tried to shorten it down to like 10 based on a Bowring paper from the 1990s. But basically, this time period here, it's a very nice picture of, I think it's like Jeremiah or Eomaiah, one of those, is just this part right here. It's just the part of the greatest diversification. Is not the whole thing by any stretch of the imagination. And so when you're reading about the Cambrian, like, who are you like relying on typically? Who do you read?
The Cambrian explosion analysis I got from Richard Dawkins.
Okay, so as in like that 1986 book, that book from 40 years ago? How long ago was that? 86 was almost, it was a little while back, right?
Information's changed since then, has it?
Exactly right. I agree. So 38. Yeah, so 38 million years ago was 1986. And so the information in that book is not, the most up to date. If you want more recent Dawkins stuff, I'd recommend The Ancestor's Tale, which he published a second edition in 2016. And I'd recommend it because I've actually been going through it chapter by chapter. I'm not covering the Cambrian explosion again because I've done that in so many videos. I'm not doing it again. But if you want, you could look at that. The Velvet Worm's Tale is about the Cambrian explosion. Anyway, the point of the matter is, it's not like that's not the whole thing. you have events before and events after, and they don't just pop out of nowhere. Like, do you see what I'm saying?
I get what you're explaining.
Okay.
And with that, we are at that time where I need
Okay.
to end the show.
Okay.
You can expand on it more and like on your channel when I show up later on.
Yeah, that's fine.
If you want.
That's fine.
But we are at that time limit, so I'm going to close us out here. Thank you guys, those of you who are watching on Rumble. It's been hovering around 9 to 10 viewers throughout most of the stream, so congratulations on all of you for actually sticking around. And also, if you're watching this after the fact, after we've gone live, and you're watching the replay on like Quarter, on BitChute, or on Rumble, I hope you guys appreciated the stream. And with that, I bid all of you farewell, and I will see you on the next live stream that I do. And you guys, Brett and Jackson, are welcome to make any kind of outro greetings you want.
Oh,
You can say goodbye, basically.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Well, I really enjoyed myself, TTOR. It was really nice meeting you, Mr. Jackson. It's good to just sit back and have a good conversation without things getting all wild and ridiculous. Hell, I was practically not even needed. You guys did well.
Yeah, thanks again. Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome. And with that, this is the end of an amazing interfaith dialogue.